My name is Matthew Vishua. I run the Bible Protector website. It's a ministry about the King James Bible and its purity and how we should be using it today. In a documentary that was made a little while ago that was on the BBC, it had in that documentary Adam Nicolson as the maker of the documentary interviewing Gordon Campbell. Adam Nicolson is a historical revisionist. He's written a book called God's Secretaries, or it was also printed under the title of Power and Glory, and that's what's available in Australia. And in that book, he goes through the translators of the King James Bible. He says basically anything bad he can say about them, every sort of sensationalized, over exaggerative type of description he can make. That's what he puts in his book. And he wants to beat up that there's a battle, which of course is largely a fictitious one, between the Puritans and the Anglicans. Of course, we know that there was historically a battle between the Prelates and the Puritans down the line under, if you go in the time after George Abbott, and when Laud was the Archbishop and Charles was the King. Well, we understand it in that context, but the King James Bible was made many years before that, and when you look at the view of what the Puritans were, many of them, and I'm talking about the moderate ones, were quite happy to operate in the periphery of the Anglican Church, operating with what they would term reforming principles, and that's quite fine, and we are, of course, as Christians today, supportive of that view. What we're not supportive of course, was the tendency towards Romanization, which took place later. But to accuse, as if in the time of the King James Bible, in the making of the King James Bible, as though that was merely a political decision by King James, as is misrepresented in various documentaries, or as if the battle was between Puritans and Anglicans at that time, is not a fair treatment of history. Furthermore, if we look at Gordon Campbell, he's written a book called Bible, that's the name of the book, The Story of the King James Version, 1611 to 2011, which takes from the Oxford University Press point of view a overview of the history of the King James Bible. Basically, it's a derivative work where he's looked at various sources like Scrivener, Norton. He's also looked at other sources, such as David Crystal and Ward Allen. And by looking at these particular sources and other such things, he's amalgamated and compiled together a fairly readable book on the history of the King James Bible. And that's fine in itself. But the problem is, and you can see now in this clip that I'm taking from a BBC documentary, obviously from Britain, where you have Adam Nicolson leering effeminately as you have Gordon Campbell explains about how, there was this battle between the Puritans and the Anglicans kind of thing, and then you have Adam Nicolson leering and laughing as if, in a way as if the King James Bible was not really a Puritan Bible, and I don't know how they can come to that conclusion, except that it's modern historical revisionism, because and tabloid reporting, because if you look historically, it was the Puritans that took up the King James Bible. I mean, you have people like at Trinity College promoting the King James Bible. You have people like eventually Oliver Cromwell supporting the King James Bible. So it wasn't a anti-Puritan Bible. In fact, the Puritans were all in support of the King James Bible. If that was not the case, then the Geneva version would have prevailed once King Charles's head was chopped off. But of course, no, true history shows us that the King James Bible was prevailing in the time of the Puritans, and the Geneva version was not prevailing at all. And that's a very important point, because it totally undermines this idea that there's some division. You see, the King James Bible is and has been authoritative for true English-speaking Christian believers historically, and is the true Bible for genuine true Anglicans, and there's a whole evangelical Anglican movement that has arisen, and whether you also look at what were called the Puritans, and eventually into the dissenting type of movement, the dissenters, and moving on into various groups alongside, such as the Methodist movement, and eventually with missionary movements and into holiness movements and Salvation Army and so on, and even coming out of that the Pentecostal movement as well. You can see very plainly and clearly that the King James Bible was used by all these groups and by all these movements, and that the King James Bible is not a prelate or an Anglo-Catholic work, and to it imply as if that there was the Puritans and these Anglo-Catholics were in this battle is just purely a fictional rendering of history. It's mythological. It is not correct. It's a beat up, and what we want to do is set the record straight very plainly and clearly. But I want you to just to show a little tiny clip in purposes of a review from a BBC documentary that shows the discussion that took place, just a little snippet, between Gordon Campbell and who's a bearded gentleman and from Oxford University, and Adam Nicolson, who was the effeminately leering commentator making the documentary. Let's have a look.
Was so tied up with the existing establishment, with bishops and all that they wanted nothing to do with it.
So, Bishop's Bible, no Puritan words, no Puritan marginal notes. Do you think the Puritans were sold a dummy here?
In a sense they were, in that they were brought in believing that this was their great chance. And in the end, well, not in the end, in the beginning, the rules effectively strangled their ambitions.